We turn our attention today to chapter 21 of Exodus, and now we're moving from the moral law of God, the Ten Commandments, to the other kinds of laws and regulations that God is going to give these people. These will be what we would call civil and ceremonial laws, and they are particularly designed for the nation of Israel in the land of promise that would govern them as a nation in civil matters and ceremonial matters, the religious practices, going forward. Now, quite honestly, this is where a lot of people start to lose their way in reading through the Bible. We've worked our way up now to Exodus chapter 20, and it's so far so good. There's been a lot of action, a lot of information, very interesting, I hope. But when we get to chapter 21, we're now looking at ordinances and regulations and details that really have very little application to us today. And that is where people start getting bored and they start losing interest. So let me encourage you at this point. So I keep a notebook of my notes on this. This is my notebook that I'm using right now. And I encourage you to do the same. But when you come to passages like this, don't get lost in the weeds. Don't try to parse out every detail and meditate on these things and get bored to death. Unless you're really wanting to do some kind of specialized study, I would encourage you to read through rather quickly, picking up the oversights and the information as best you can, but not getting waylaid with all this information that can really sidetrack you from the things that are here. Now, I think there are principles here for us, but it is not directly written to the church age Christian. And so we pick up some principles, some ideas, and so forth, and we see how Israel functioned. But because they're not directly applicable to us today, we can get pretty bored with this. And I would encourage you not to do that. Read through rather quickly. Read the Psalm that we have also available every day. Meditate on that a little more heavily than perhaps in the past. Well, as we look at chapter 21, we see just very quickly that there are regulations and ordinances related to a number of items. He's just simply going through these. First of all, he starts with slaves in chapter 21, verses 1 through 11, and he talks about that. Now, I would say this, some of these regulations and ideas concerning slaves are not exactly up to modern standards. But we have to put this in the context of the day. The people at that time, the pagan people at that time, treated their slaves like property and like animals. They could kill them, they could abuse them, they could do anything they wanted to with them. The Lord is setting up standards that would protect slaves. Slaves was a common way to live at that time. It is not exactly one-on-one with American slavery. That's where our mind goes to, the American type of slavery. This is not exactly the same thing. This was a way that people lived. Some people chose to be slaves because it was a better lifestyle than many other ways to live. But there were regulations God put on them to protect those slaves and so that they might be treated properly. So keep that in mind. And then in verses 12 to 27, he talks about personal injury situations of various kinds. And the key here is found in verses 23 and 24 that I know you're familiar with. He says the penalty for these injuries is life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, the eye for the eye mentality. Now, this is not the New Testament understanding of personal injury, in which we forgive and we allow the Lord to work in His own way, through bringing about revenge or vengeance as necessary. This is a civil code. This is how the penal system was to work. If there was damage done, injury done, here's how it was to be handled. So it's not a personal thing so much as a civil thing. And then we have in verses 28 on down, we have property and animal damage. And the key here is the word restitution. And we see that, first of all, in verse 34 of chapter 21, but we also see it in verse 3 of chapter 22. It's mentioned in verse 4. It's mentioned in verse 12. And in other places. Restitution. In our penal system today, primarily, if someone commits a crime, does injury, we put them in jail. In the Jewish system, there's lots of reasons for capital punishment, which took care of a lot of things. But secondly, there is a restitution factor. If you If you stole somebody's goods, you had to repay them and a lot more, a restitution type system. And then we come to injustice in chapter 22, verse 16 through chapter 23, verse 9. And the key is here, 23, verse 6, you shall not pervert the justice due to the needy and so forth. Justice is to be fair. There's not to be perverted. Even going to the point of talking about people that needed funds and so forth. Look at verse 26 of chapter 22. Verse 25. If you lend money to my people, you shall not charge them interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you return it before sunset. This is especially talking about poor people and and loaning to them. You don't charge interest, you don't take advantage of them. You are not to pervert justice. Bottom line is you're to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the bottom line. And so I take this, I give this to you now as something to consider as we look at these laws and ordinances. Look at them in this way. Look at the big picture. Look at the principles. Don't get lost in the weeds. Okay. See you next week.